Are you angry? I hope you are frigging angry.
We hold the power to change the political calculus in America.
We have power. We have so much power.
So we will vote, we will resist, we will hug trees, we will stop our own polluting, we will boycott companies that pollute.
The seas are rising, and so are we.
We're gonna go raise a ruckus.
This really marks the escalation of Fire Drill Fridays.
So we need to ramp up voter turnout in a way that we never have before.
And voting is the only way that we can compete with the unlimited political spending of fossil fuel interests.
We must be in solidarity. See you next time. Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad you're here. It's the first Friday of the month, so it's a rally. It's our 6th virtual rally, and today it's all about the power of voting. So glad you're here. And those who've tuned in through social media, let us know how you're holding up in the chat, in the, you know, that thing, that chat, Facebook chat place, okay? Let us know how you're doing. We have a really incredible program today that will remind us and inspire us about why we must vote and give us information about how best to do it. We're going to hear from Eric Liu with Citizen University, Oakland Councilmember Nikki Fortunato Bas, and Desmond Meade from the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. Make sure you stay until the very end because we've got a special musical performance by the Chicks. In 1989, I traveled to Eastern Europe. You see, the Iron Curtain had just fallen, communism had collapsed, and I wanted to know how people, especially artists, were reacting and feeling. In Czechoslovakia, the famous poet and lyricist Karel Kryl told me he had become so proficient at expressing his non-communist views indirectly and with subtle hints and cues for audiences who were proficient at reading between the lines that now, with communism gone, he was finding it difficult to express himself openly. You know, these are the kind of things you don't really think about. Actors in East Germany were scared because under communism, theater had always been subsidized by the government, and they didn't know if they could survive now in the open market. But what stands out for me most about that trip was how people felt about finally being able to vote. People were throwing voting parties. Students were just ecstatic, composing joyful songs about voting. Every excitement was just bubbling up. You could cut it. It was so thick in the air. And this reminds me how precious, how not to be taken for granted voting is. People have fought hard for the right to vote. People have died for it. And now, for the first time in American history, we'll be voting at a time when that precious right is being threatened. It is quite possible that if we don't prevail in November, the right might be taken away for good. So we need to rise up and exercise our right to vote and bring as many people with us as we can and celebrate it joyfully as if it was the first time. The election is now 32 days away, okay? The goal for all of us right now is to ensure that Joe Biden doesn't just win, but wins by an unmistakable landslide. This is so there's no chance for Trump to declare himself a winner early on and have the Supreme Court decide the outcome, as happened in 2000, when the race was so close between Al Gore and George W. Bush. So to help this happen, you need to vote early. Voting early isn't the same in all states. For instance, in California, early voting begins 29 days before the election, whereas in New York, it's just 10 days before the election. So it's super important that you go online and confirm your registration status, and then find out when early voting starts in your state. Make sure you get your ballot as early as possible. Then vote as soon as possible. And after you triple check the rules about postmarking, mail it or carry it to either the post office, an official drop box, or to a polling place if yours is open early. Take care to vote up and down the ballot. Every race from your state legislature, governor, sheriff, boards of supervisors, attorneys general, city council members, judges, every one of those races is so important to how life plays out in your town, city, county, and state, as well as in the nation. Boards of supervisors aren't necessarily the same in each state, but every state has an equivalent body that approves the budgets of county departments and programs, supervises the official conduct of county officers and employees, and appropriates and spends money on programs that meet county residents' needs. Attorneys general are the top legal officers of their state, and they act as the people's lawyer. So you see how important these positions are. Even when good things are happening in the nation's capital, so much when bad things are happening in the nation's capital, in your states and counties, good things can be done to address the climate crisis, the COVID pandemic, and police violence. Spend a little time finding out what candidates' positions are on issues important to you and where they get their money. While the Federal Election Commission maintains a searchable database for this on its website, we recommend going to the Center for Responsive Politics website. It's opensecrets.com, opensecrets.com, which is more user-friendly and uses analysis of the vast amounts of election data. Now, for state-level races, turn to followthemoney.org. Followthemoney.org, a joint project of the National Institute on Money and Politics and the Campaign Finance Institute. And pay special attention to whether the candidate is taking fossil fuel money and or military money, which would include money from the largest suppliers of the military, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, and General Dynamics. Don't vote for any candidate beholden to these players. If you're voting by mail, take your time to read and follow the instructions very carefully. Be certain you don't make a mistake, and be sure your signature looks the same in every case. In Pennsylvania, hundreds of thousands of ballots cast for this election could be rejected because they weren't placed in the security envelope. Check to ensure that your ballot envelope has a postage stamp, and if you have any doubt, put one on. And don't forget to make sure your ballot is appropriately post-dated as applicable. Make a plan for how you want to vote. If you vote at home and you want to mail your ballot at your nearest voting precinct, find out where the closest one is by going to vote.org. Find out when they open and when they close. This year, more than ever, there may be a long line, in fact, so come prepared. Wear a mask, bring some hand sanitizer, and keep social distance. Bring plenty of water and snacks, and maybe something to keep you warm in case the temperature drops or it starts to rain. In fact, an umbrella may be smart against either rain or sun. You never know these days. Maybe bring a folding chair, but please be prepared. The same is true if you plan on voting November 3rd at your nearest polling place, but everyone is advised to vote as early as you possibly can. You can also drop your ballot off at an official ballot box. It's called a drop box. Your county election officials will announce where the drop-off locations are, and drop boxes are at least 30 days. They're gonna tell you where the locations are 30 days prior to the election. It's difficult, if it's difficult for you to get to a polling place or drop off your early ballot, you can use the official drop box instead. It's very safe. Any ballots retrieved from a drop box or drop off location will be processed in the same way as vote by mail ballots personally delivered to the office of the county election officials and ballots received via the U.S. Postal Service or any other delivery service. If you know of new immigrants who may be challenged by the voting process, offer to walk them through it. If you live near elderly people or anyone facing special physical challenge, maybe offer to drive them to a drop box or polling place. Find out if the polling places near you need poll workers. Some states have announced there's been an astounding outpouring of volunteer poll workers, and it should make us all happy to know that civic duty is alive and well in those places. But we've heard that in an attempt to intimidate voters of color, especially Black voters, the Trump administration is bringing back armed uniform poll watchers. Republicans did this early in the 1980s, and this election will be the first time in 40 years when Republicans again will be deploying armed poll watchers. So, it's going to be important for us to have folks that are in there to ensure that no bad stuff happens, to stand up for the voters. If being a poll watcher is a possibility for you, go to Google, type in the name of your state, and then type "be a poll watcher." And do this as soon as you can, because poll watchers need to get training. And you can feel absolutely secure that there's a full COVID protection standards are being adhered to in all polling places. So our first speaker is going to speak about the other side of power, our power, and about how much we have, how to embrace our power and how to use that power to profoundly impact the culture of citizenship. Eric says, quote, "There's no such thing as not voting. Not voting is voting to hand your power over to someone who wants to use it against you." Eric Liu is the co-founder and CEO of Citizen University, which works to build a culture of powerful and responsible citizenship in the United States. He also directs the Aspen Institute's Citizen and American Identity program. He's the author of several acclaimed books, including his most recent, Become America: Civic Sermons on Love, Responsibility, and Democracy. It's a New York Times new and notable book. He's been selected as an Ashoka Fellow and a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Liu served as a White House speechwriter for President Bill Clinton, and later as the president's deputy domestic policy advisor. He was later appointed by President Obama to serve on the board of the Corporation for National and Community Service. Please welcome Eric Liu.
Jane, thank you so much. It is a thrill to be here today, and I'm just completely fired up for this Fire Drill Friday. I'm sitting here in Seattle right now, where we are actually still surrounded by smoke from actual fires caused by this climate crisis, fires in California. And the thing that is just literally, as I look out this window right now, I'm reminded of is that there's no such thing as someone else's problem. This is everyone's problem right now, and this is everyone's responsibility. And what we do at Citizen University is, as you said, we work to try to teach power, to break down the idea that we all have power, but we also all need to practice power, and then to couple that power with a spirit of what you were just describing, Jane, talking about Eastern Europe in 1989, a spirit of joy, of appreciation, of celebration, recognizing that this is not to be taken for granted. Fresh air is not to be taken for granted. A democracy that works is not to be taken for granted. We sustain these things by our active choices. And today I want to talk about three things that we've got to do right now with our vote and with our power. The first thing is this: we've got to remember that voting is central. Does voting solve everything? No. No, but it is literally the price of the ticket. And I know that everybody who's watching right now, if you're joining a Fire Drill Friday, I'm preaching to the converted, right? You're going to vote, you want to vote, you intend to vote, but your job now is to go forth and convert others. Your job is to go forth. If we're preaching to the choir, your job is to make your own choir about why voting matters. And as you were saying, Jane, a moment ago, there is, at the end of the day, if you run up against people who are like, what's the point of voting? I'm not going to vote. The game is rigged. My vote won't count. I'm just one person. You've got to, in this moment now, muster up some arguments against that. Here's the core one that we use. There is no such thing as not voting. Not voting is voting. Not voting is voting and choosing affirmatively to give your power and your voice over to somebody else who's going to use it against you in your name. Not voting is choosing to wear a kick me sign on your back and a t-shirt that on the front that says chump, right? And nobody right now, and especially young people in this country right now, should want to be wearing a t-shirt that says chump to say, please come and take advantage of me, right? This is a time right now where we've got to claim our power. And you do that by, in the first place, recognizing that we have the power of the ballot. We still have in the system the ability to correct what has gone completely off the rails. We can do that if we exercise this power. The thing about voting is that it's not only about the casting of the ballot, right? We've got to recognize too, as what Ralph Waldo Emerson said. I mean, Jane, you've been such a model of not just rallying folks, but engaging in civil disobedience, right? And being willing to put yourself out there. And Emerson said, cast your whole vote, not merely a strip of paper, but your whole influence. And that brings me to the second thing I want to talk about today, our power. Our power is our whole influence. Now, we come together at a rally like this, and we think we know what power is. And we use that word and we throw it around. But power is not just a thing out there. Power is not just a feeling that we have when we all come together wearing red shirts like this. Power is a language. And we must learn to master that language. Literacy in power, how to read power, how to understand where it comes from, who has it, why that is, who doesn't have it, and why that is, and how you change it, how you mobilize and activate money and people and ideas and social norms to make the change happen that you want to see in the world. That's getting literate in power. And so the second thing we've got to do today, besides spreading the word about voting, is actually committing to becoming masters of power, to understand how to read and then how to write power. Power is not some vague thing and a force that happens to us. It is our own responsibility and literacy. And the thing that I want to add as well about power is this. Once you take stock of all the different forms of power that you have, and do not let yourself fall into the story that says, well, I don't have power. Who, me? I'm just fill in the blank, right? I'm just a kid. I'm just an immigrant. I'm just somebody who nobody knows. No, if you know one other person, you have power, because it is entirely possible in even the most rigged situations in the world to generate brand new power out of thin air through the magic act of organizing. And that's what we're doing right here. That's what they did in 1988 and 89 in Eastern Europe and bringing down the Berlin Wall. And that's what we're doing right now in our country. We are part of a great awakening of people who are finding their voice and finding their power to reform and reclaim our democracy, to fix and remedy these deep, deep injustices around race that are structured into every institution in our society. People are waking up to their power. But it can't just be a feeling. It's got to be a commitment to read and learn and teach and understand and practice power. And the third and final thing I want to say is this. When we think about what it means to live like a citizen, we've got to remember that all of this work is work of joy. How blessed, how lucky are we to get to be doing this right now? Yeah, things are dark. I'm not Pollyanna. I'm not saying, things are literally dark and smoky out here. But I mean, in this time right now, how lucky are we to get to gather, organize, find our voice, persuade our neighbors, our family members, and change the course of our country. We can do it with a spirit of joy, of celebration, right? The fact that the chicks are going to be joining us later today is not a nice bolted on, added on thing. It is integral to the whole spirit of the rally. The whole point of us is to remember that we can do things together and we want to feel like we're part of something greater than ourselves. Democracy works only if enough of us believe democracy works. And that belief can't be pounded into you by a lecture. It can't be instilled in you by someone telling you to eat your vegetables. That belief arises from a spirit of, I want to be part of this. I want to join the party. I want to join the club. I'm coming to this rally. I'm ringing this bell. And the fire drill that we're part of is not just ringing the bell because things are on fire. We're not just resisting a bad. We're not just here to negate a negative. We are here to affirm an affirmative. And that is the power that we have as parts of this country who are going to rewrite the narrative of what this country can be. That's what we're doing here today. That's what we're going to do in 32 days. And I'm so glad to be part of this rally, Jane. Thank you so much.
Wow. So much. Those powerful words about power. What a powerful call to action. Thank you so much. And now let's welcome Nikki Fortunato Bas. She is a council member of the most diverse district of Oakland, California. For 2 decades prior to being elected in 2018, Nikki's been organizing and advocating for worker, environmental, gender, and racial justice. She started out in Oakland, California, in Chinatown, Oakland, Chinatown, organizing immigrant garment workers to win their back wages. Yes, she worked with coalitions of community activists and raising Oakland's minimum wage. Since taking office in 2019, Nikki led the passage of the strongest COVID-19 eviction moratorium in the state of California. Yes, she authored fair chance housing protections for people with conviction records, created a fund for community land trusts to stop displacement and create permanently affordable community-owned housing. Yes. And is now leading a task force to reimagine public safety in Oakland with the goal of reducing the police budget by $150 million and instead fund programs that address the root causes of violence. Yes, talk about joy. Let's welcome Nikki, Councilmember Nikki Bas.
Thank you so much, Jane. It's a true honor to be part of this fire drill rally with you. I've been an admirer of your work and your activism for so long. So we've seen so much loss and grief during 2020 from the unprecedented wildfires that have devastated millions of acres of our natural environment, our communities, and our farm workers throughout California, where I live, to the unspeakable trauma our fellow sisters, mothers, children are enduring in ICE detention centers, to the continued assault on the dignity and freedom of our most vulnerable communities in the midst of climate chaos, only to be made worse by the unequal impacts of COVID-19. Yet, for all of the hardship that we have endured this year, I urge you to remain hopeful, and this is what these rallies are about. In my many years of building power to demand better for our communities, I found that it's often in the darkest times when we see most clearly the path forward, when we see that there is no way out but through. And I believe that with each of us doing our part, organizing with the energy we have to give, that is precisely what we will do to get through. And prior to winning my seat at City Hall 2 years ago, I was an organizer for 2 decades. As Jane said, I campaigned alongside immigrant, women, and formerly incarcerated workers for living wage jobs and affordable housing. I knocked on doors year round, even when there wasn't an election, to engage communities of color that had lower voter participation, to engage them in our democratic process. And 6 years ago, I worked with a coalition to gather signatures to raise the minimum wage and win paid sick days in Oakland. I talked with voters who let their registration lapse since they voted in the election that Obama won. They told me that if they were able to place this minimum wage measure on the ballot, it would give them a reason to vote. It would concretely improve their lives. And so that year, we got the measure on the ballot, we registered people to vote, and we passed a higher minimum wage and unpaid sick days for Oakland, with 88% of voters saying yes. So voting mattered for the thousands of workers who got a raise. But you know what? We had to go to the ballot because the city council at the time would not raise the minimum wage, even though they had the power to do that. And so a few years later, after that campaign, my community asked me to run for office. And I left the many years of organizing that I had done to win a seat inside City Hall. And here's what a difference a progressive community organizer makes, a progressive elected official makes. My agenda includes housing as a human right, reimagining public safety and protecting Black lives, and corporate accountability. And in under 2 years in office, and in partnership with community and labor organizations I worked in coalition with, as you heard in the introduction, I have authored and passed legislation to ensure formerly incarcerated residents have a fair chance at housing, to enact the state's strongest eviction moratorium for renters during COVID, to create a task force that will reimagine public safety, reduce Oakland's police budget by 50% or $150 million, and reallocate those funds to alternative programs that focus on the root causes of violence and promote healing and prevention. We've also updated our corporate business tax to be more fair to small businesses, make sure large corporations pay their fair share, and raise millions to pay for vital city services. So elections matter. Progressive elected officials matter. So do your homework. Look at who your candidates are at every level. Locally, what is their track record and experience? Who endorses them? Who donates to them? Because even today, corporations are still trying to buy our elections. It's happening in Oakland, where I live, and in California with billionaire corporations. Like Jane said, make sure you vote not only in national and state races, but also your local races, because change comes from the bottom up. Decisions we make in our cities and towns are going to wave across the entire country to create change. So I urge you to draw hope and take action from the thought of our shared strength, from the thought of our ancestors who fought and sacrificed relentlessly for our right to be heard, to self-determine our futures. Draw on the strength from the love you have for your children, for future generations, whose livelihoods count on our willingness to step up, to organize, and change the status quo. So let's rekindle that fire in our bellies, inspired to uphold our democracy and undo the systems that threaten all of us. Each of us can organize, shift the public narrative, and vote. That is building power. Let's all do our part. And as you heard, our message today and every Friday, every Fire Drill Friday, is simple. Let's use our power to vote. Make sure you are registered to vote. Make sure you have a plan to vote. Make sure that you vote early. And thank you, Jane, and all of you who are organizing these Fire Drill Fridays. It has really restoked the fire in my belly to do everything I can to get out the vote this election year. So thank you.
All right. Powerful words, Nikki. Thank you so much. Let's see, I'm going to introduce a video now. So our team, our visual team, Fire Drill Friday and Greenpeace, has put together a video to show how important voting is and then staying involved after voting. So enjoy this video that's going to come on now.
I've just had my say in the government of our country, my own private say. As an American, I have that right. Every one of these people has that right. You have it. It's something special.
Voting is power. If we want a healthy democracy, then we must ensure that everyone can access that power. Systemic efforts to suppress Black voters have taken different forms over the years. Going back to the Mississippi Plan of 1870, when Black voters were met with violent intimidation at the polls. But thanks to the many people who struggled, the people who fought and died, rights were won and laws were changed.
I speak tonight for the dignity of man and the destiny of democracy.
The Voting Rights Act prohibited racial discrimination in voting for nearly 50 years. But then in 2013, the Supreme Court gutted it.
And we need to call it what it is. We have come here today, our president has brought us here because what is happening in our nation today is a crime against democracy.
As a result, thousands of polling stations in predominantly Black and brown counties have been closed, leading to long lines and decreased turnout. Long voting lines are voter suppression. 1 in 40 citizens losing their right to vote due to a felony conviction is voter suppression, as is attempting to discredit the USPS. We can't let them silence any of us. There is simply too much at stake. Not only are we dealing with a health crisis and confronting systemic racism in our police departments, we're also in the middle of an escalating climate crisis. We've seen unprecedented fires in California, devastating hurricanes across the Gulf and Atlantic, and historic flooding in the Midwest. At a time when we should be increasing climate and environmental protections, Trump is using our tax dollars to orchestrate $1 billion bailout to polluting oil companies. He's packed his administration with climate deniers and fossil fuel industry insiders. And in a single term, Trump has weakened or removed over 100 different environmental regulations that disproportionately impact communities of color. Getting Trump out of office is the first step in ending the climate crisis. But we can't just go back to how things were before. We must elect climate champions to Congress to pass a Green New Deal for workers, families, and communities. A people-powered democracy, where everyone has a say, is our best tool for protecting the planet. Make sure your voice is heard this November.
Yeah. And now I'm going to introduce Desmond Meade. He is a formerly homeless returning citizen who overcame many obstacles to eventually become the president of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, FRRC, chair of Floridians for a Fair Democracy, and a graduate of Florida International University College of Law, a Ford Global Fellow, and a published author of Let My People Vote. Did I mention that he's a former felon? Recognized by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world in 2019, Desmond led the FRRC to a historic victory in 2018 with the successful passage of Amendment 4, which was a grassroots citizens initiative which restored voting rights to over 1.4 million Floridians with past felony convictions. Amendment 4 represented the single largest expansion of voting rights in the United States in half a century and brought an end to 150 years of a Jim Crow era law in Florida. Named Floridian and Central Floridian of the Year in 2019, Desmond presently leads efforts to empower and civically re-engage local communities across the state and to reshape local, state, and national criminal justice policies. Please welcome Desmond Meade.
Thank you so much, Jane. You know, so much of what has been said already really resonates with me because, you know, just last month, I voted for the very first time in over 30 years. But I want to take you back. I want to take everyone back to August of 2005 when I was homeless and addicted to drugs and standing in front of railroad tracks, waiting on a train to come so I could jump in front of it. You know, I didn't have any hope and I didn't see any light at the end of the tunnel. And I was ready to end my life, but God had other plans for me. And eventually I crossed those tracks and I checked myself into substance abuse treatment. And after 4 months, I was able to move into a homeless shelter. And while there, you know, I decided to enroll in one of the local colleges, did extremely well, was able to obtain a couple of associate's degree, and eventually a bachelor's degree. And once graduating with highest honors, I was finally accepted into law school. And in May of 2014, I graduated with a law degree. But in spite of the obstacles that I've been able to overcome, in spite of the fact that I had dedicated my life to community service and giving back to society, because I lived in Florida and because I committed a felony offense in my past, I could not vote. I could not practice law. I couldn't live anywhere I wanted to live. But the biggest barrier of them all was the silencing of my voice by the state of Florida, which permanently disenfranchised every individual who's convicted of a felony offense. Well, I knew that something was wrong with that, and it really hit home in November of 2016 when my wife, Sheena, ran for office, and I couldn't even vote for her, in spite of the fact that people in Maine and Vermont were able to vote from jail or prisons. Because I lived in the state of Florida, which insisted on holding on to a Jim Crow law, I, among 1.68 million American citizens, could not participate in democracy. But I knew that we had to change that. And we organized an amazing grassroots movement that launched the ballot initiative that restored voting rights to people with felony convictions after they've served their time. Amendment 4. And in November of 2018, over 5.1 million Floridians voted yes on Amendment 4, and we were able to accomplish the largest expansion of voting rights for over half a century. That's right, we did that. The people did that. People from all walks of life, from all political persuasions, decided to stand up for second chances, decided to stand up for democracy and say yes. And now, when we moved into the next era, of course, we have politicians that didn't like that don't believe that every person in the United States who is a citizen and who's qualified should participate in our democracy. And they erected barriers that prevented many of the 1.4 million Floridians who were going to be benefiting from Amendment 4 to actually be able to register to vote. They enacted these laws that required the payment of fines and fees. Many of these returning citizens were too poor to be able to pay those fines and fees and was therefore once again barred from being able to vote. But let me tell you about the power of people. Let me tell you about the power of a grassroots movement. When people around our community, people around the state decided that enough was enough and that our democracy should not be held hostage, they stood up and they fought back. They gave and they gave and they gave into our fines and fees fund. And we're now able to assist so many citizens to be able to participate in our democracy if they so choose. And I was one of those individuals just last month when I voted for the very first time in over 30 years. And let me tell you, Jane, that feeling was an amazing feeling. When I walked up to the polling location, and I was taking the spirits of my ancestors with me, my ancestors who shed blood on this soil, who were murdered, who were hung, who were bitten by dogs and burned alive to prevent people from voting. When they went through all of that just so I could have that opportunity, I also took with me over 774,000 returning citizens who weren't able to experience what I was getting ready to experience. I took their spirit right in that polling location with me. And as I entered into that voting booth, Jane, I'm going to tell you, I experienced a transformation. I understood that I was entering into a sacred place and I was getting ready to engage in a sacred act. I understood that voting is far more than just about whether you're voting Democrat or Republican. Voting is bigger than that. Voting is a sacred act that says something so simple yet powerful. It says that I am. It says that I exist. It says that my voice matters, that I count. And anyone that's listening to my voice or seeing me on the screen ought to know that you count, you exist, and you matter. And we have inherent within us the power to change the direction of this country, the power to make a difference, but that power does not show up unless we show up to the polls, unless we show up in that voting booth and cast that ballot. That's when you walk into that booth, it's that great equalizer, because you have just as much power as the richest American in this country when you're in that booth casting that ballot. And that is exactly how I felt. And I was overwhelmed with joy, and I was overwhelmed with honor, understanding that when people come together and demand change, and that demand is in the form of voting, change has no choice but to happen. And so I implore you, Jane, and everyone else that's looking, that you don't just go to vote by yourself, that you bring your family, you bring your friends, you bring your community with you, because together, when we bind ourselves together along the lines of humanity and demand change through voting, our world will be a much better place for you and for me. Thank you so much, Jane. Right back to you.
Wow. Oh my God, what an incredible story. Desmond, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us and giving us that call to action. That's so powerful. And congratulations on your journey and what you've accomplished. And now we go to the chicks, who the chicks are Marty McGuire, Natalie Main, and Emily Strayer. Superstars, renegades, heroes, villains, and moms. They've grown from a band into a cultural phenomenon. Since the release of their debut album, Wide Open Spaces, in 1998, the Chicks have become one of the most influential bands of all times, selling more than 30.5 million albums and $100 million in concert tickets. They are among an elite group of artists and the only female group to achieve multiple diamond selling releases, which means that they sold over 10 million copies. Wow. They've won 13 Grammy Awards. Their record-breaking studio album, Taking the Long Way, done in 2006, won 5 Grammy Awards, including Album of the Year, Record of the Year, Song of the Year. After nearly 14 years, the Chicks released their 5th studio album, Gaslighter, to rave reviews this last July. Here we go with the Chicks. This is specially done for Fire Drill Fridays.
Wow.
Wow. Thank you so much, the Chicks. God, I found that so moving. Stand up, show love. Yes. Love those women. Wow. So we've come to the end of the rally. Ending the climate crisis starts with getting Trump out of office. This is the absolute bedrock first step on the path to a future without climate-fueled extreme weather events and mass inequality, but it can't be the only goal we have. We have to empower and mobilize an unstoppable wave of climate voters who will not only win the presidency, keep the House, and take back the Senate, but will push all of those elected officials to have the confidence and fortitude once in power to pass a Green New Deal. Please visit firedrillfridays.com/vote right now. There you can find our comprehensive voter dashboard where you can look up your polling place, request a mail-in ballot, update your party registration, and most importantly, sign up to join a special Greenpeace volunteer team and join the legions of climate activists that are texting and calling climate voters. We're using sophisticated targeting data to identify these climate voters and calling and texting to make sure they know the stakes in this election and how to cast their votes in support of our planet. We've already contacted 1.5 million voters. This 2020 election, if every climate voter gets to vote, we have the power to swap a destructive force in the White House with a movable one, someone whose stance on environmental justice can be pushed with enough political pressure. That's where we come in. We've already pushed Biden to be much stronger on climate issues. And with our army of climate voters, we'll keep pushing even harder if he's in office. Thanks so much to our speakers. They're so inspiring. And to the chicks for a great performance. And to this beautiful audience. And of course, to all of you watching, stay with me this month, okay? As we keep strategically building power all the way to the election and beyond. See you next time.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you for being a part of this community.
Thank you.
Stay tuned for more information on the next virtual Fire Drill Friday rally.